What is your standard and why does it matter? What is your standard and why does it matter? Whether you acknowledge it or not, and most of the time we don't. This is something that kind of runs in the background of our lives. But whether we acknowledge it or not, we are constantly measuring our lives, our actions, our thoughts, our beliefs against a standard. And that standard determines then what we believe, what we think, how we feel, and ultimately how we act. Imagine these several categories. These are categories that all of us deal with in our lives. The category of how we feel about ourselves, how we view ourselves, and how we feel about ourselves. Do we feel good about ourselves? Or are we down on ourselves? Do we feel successful, or are we often defeated because we don't quite measure up? How do we view others? Are they of value to us? Do they have value in themselves? Well, what is morality? Where does it come from? And how do we know what is right and what is wrong? Are we full of hope or are we hopeless? These categories and so many others are judged based on a standard. We view people, we look at ourselves, we consider situations, we look down the road, and all of that we measure against a standard. And if they measure up, then we have a positive outlook, a positive view, positive thoughts, and then behave in a positive way. But if they don't quite measure up, it changes the conversation of our lives. We all have a standard, and it matters. Because in so many ways, our standard, what we measure our lives against, determines where we're going to end up. Here's the problem. For most people, since we don't really think about it, our standard defaults to culture. Now, I talk a lot about culture, and I don't want to beat up on culture because we live in culture. I'm thankful for culture. Culture is just a broad term, a broad word that means the place we live, the thoughts and ideas that make up this place. That is culture. There is cultural thought, there is cultural morality, there are cultural ideals, there are things that are culturally acceptable and things that are not. Culture, this group of people that makes up where we live, becomes our standard if we're not intentional about choosing something else. And so, whatever happens to be popular, as the sea state changes in culture, how culture feels, what culture thinks, what is popular in culture and what is no longer popular in culture, these things change, and so then the standard changes. We've seen this happen again and again and again, even in recent months. Yesterday's heroes are today's villains. The things we would give to our children not too long ago are now being pulled off the shelves because somehow they're harmful. Those who said good things yesterday that we applauded now are those that we have to turn our backs on and walk away. Why? Because the standard has changed. The standard is culture, and culture is constantly changing and always will. Therefore, you will never find peace in your life, balance in your relationships, or a positive, clear view of your future if you're measuring your life against something which will continue to change. I think that makes sense. It's intuitive, and yet most of us don't stop long enough to consider the implication of that truth. So what does that mean? It's not all hopeless. What it means is that we need to choose the right standard. Now, again, you may disagree with me on what the right standard is. But there are some things that should be a part of your standard. You see, the right standard should be something that never changes. It's in the ground, if you will, and it's not going to change regardless of what happens in culture and in life. It never changes. It's a standard that should be equally applied to all people. One of the challenges with cultural standards is that they don't equally apply to all people. You could see this as a negative or you could see this as a positive. Regardless of your position, it's true. The cultural standards don't apply evenly to all people. A standard that gives us hope and direction and clarity is one that applies equally to all people. A standard should be based on truth. Again, that goes back to that which does not change. Truth does not change. truth is not always something that makes us feel good either. A standard is not there to make us feel good about ourselves. A standard is there to help us navigate life, to make changes where changes are necessary, and to move forward in a purposeful way. It never changes. It applies to all people equally. It's based on a foundation of truth. And finally, a standard, if it's the right kind of standard, should be that which, if followed, moves us forward in our created purpose. You see, here's the thing. We were all created. There is a creator, and that creator has a plan. He has a design for our lives, for the way that we should live. It's as if he has designed the thing and given us an owner's manual. That thing could be a car, an airplane, a house. It could be anything. He built it, he created it, and he's given us an owner's manual, and we get to decide, will we allow that owner's manual to determine for us how we'll behave or not? If we're using the standard given to us by the Creator, then we'll be able to operate in the way for which we were created and accomplish the things that we were intended to accomplish. It's how we live a fulfilling life. So much is said about living a happy, fulfilling life. How do we live a happy, fulfilling life? By living according to the standard given to us by our Creator. Now again, I can acknowledge that not everyone sees the world the way that I see it. If you're watching this, you probably at least acknowledge the way that I see the world as being something to consider. I'll tell you this, there is only one standard that does not change. It never has, and it never will. There's only one standard that is applied to all people equally. One standard that's based on truth. Not the relative kind of truth that culture speaks about, but real truth. There's only one standard that, if followed, moves us forward in our created purpose. That standard is the manual given to us by our Creator. It is Scripture. It is the Bible. You see, here's the thing. Culture will change. If history teaches us anything, it's that people will always change. They will. And with them, emotions will change, and common thought will change, and what's right and wrong, those things will change because they're not based on anything concrete. But even in a sea that is constantly shifting, the waves are constantly coming, the wind is constantly blowing, and a culture that is in incredible upheaval, we can hang on to the right standard, make the right decisions, see the world the right way, raise our kids in a way that will be meaningful not only to themselves, but to the world that they grow up into. And we can fulfill the purpose for which we were created. So I'll go back once again. Do you have peace in your life? Do you have hope? Are you seeing things clearly? Whether you are or are not is based upon your standard. What is your standard?